Okay, I think pretty much everyone is coming in, so we'll start off the very final session of this conference. And in some ways, I suppose it's a little bit of a sad moment because we're starting to come towards the end of the papers. But at least we have some activities today or tomorrow. So looking forward to that and being able to bond even more on a level in terms of looking at more watercraft. Okay, so we have three papers for this afternoon's final session, and the first one is delivered in person, and it's from Dorina Tully. So Dorina, I've known Dorina, if it feels like an entire lifetime, and I mean that in a very good way. Dorina's spent nearly 40 years working on vernacular Irish craft, so there's arguably no better expert really on this material on our little island. She studied in the University of Ulster and also at St Andrews, and she's worked on the Traditional Boats of Ireland project. She's done a survey of heritage boats on inland waterways of Ireland with a colleague there, Catherine Buchanan, and that project ran from 2016 to 2019, so that's even very recent sort of work. And with that work, they won the Guardian Prize for the Best Inland Navigation Heritage Project worldwide. So we're particularly proud, like me, that she's from Ireland, won that award, and we're going to hear more from her now. So thank you, Dorina.
Thank you, Noel. Okay, so I was sort of asked to give just an overview of the whole skin boat tradition in Ireland. So this is all very general, but I also have been asked a number of questions on construction. So over the years, as my friends from ISBSA, I have sort of been presenting my research over 20 years, as it progresses. So I'm not kind of going into any great detail. I could talk for 2 hours just on construction. So I'm giving you an overview, and I'm just going to point out a few things I'm going to add in as I go along. Now, so ancient watercraft. So we're really lucky in Ireland. We still have the descendants of an ancient tradition of watercraft in the form of skin boats. And in Ireland, these are known as currachs, or in the south of Ireland, where they've developed quite a lot, they're known as navogues. I won't bother you with that. It's the Gaelic version of the Latin for little ships. Just on this is just a painting, which is just to show you a few details here. So this is not basket technology. These are more like an engineering construction. They're very light, extremely strong, and are big load carriers. So there's a lot of shear in both the bow and the stern, which makes them very seaworthy because the waves come up behind them and rise the stern instead of flooding it. And there's also quite a lot of flare on the sides, and there's quite a lot of rocker in the bottom. They have it all. So the currach, how long has it been around? This is a thorny question when you're dealing with in what's mainly a terrestrial environment of archaeology, which is very well developed in Ireland, but maritime isn't. So currach, a boat peculiar to Ireland, especially in its western coast, used for local traffic. It is of great antiquity. So this is the thing. So just looking at generally, a round-hulled keyless craft operating in a dynamic environment. There's still probably of these still fishing, mainly a valuable crab and lobster fishing on the west coast. And they're out in weather and seas that an equivalent fiberglass boat just can't take. They're also, as I said, they're very high in load capacity. And, well, this is obviously not the usual launching it's put in for because it looks great. But they do launch into the waves. And in up to very recent years, as in up to about the 1960s, many of the offshore islands had no proper big quays for big ferries, and all the supplies for the islands came out in currachs and loaded onto bigger boats out on moorings. So apologies for, I should have put a map in of where Ireland is in relation to Europe, but Ireland's on the western coast of Europe. I'll be showing a map in a few minutes where it puts it in relation to the United Kingdom and France. So starting at the north of Ireland, there's are all the different types of locations. Locations have pretty much stayed the same for about 200 years. Actual details of numbers, the British were very good at keeping records, and we have early 19th century fishery reports right through to the 1930s of numbers that were fishing. These are the numbers that were being used for other things, but just for fishing. So these are the locations. Leisure also now is growing, and the second city of Ireland, Cork, has been a huge new people rowing for pleasure. And although this is a city with a big port, there's about 60 currachs in the club, and these guys also do long-distance voyages. There's now about a dozen clubs around Ireland. The city, actually, Dublin City, has only a very small group involved. A few boats kept there. But it's mainly a West Coast thing. So the types of currachs, we have approximately 14 different styles. Even within areas, they know that's that from that island and that's from another island. But the main thing is they use 3 different methods of construction. So the most primitive, probably close to what early man was using, is the hazel and willow frames with single gunnels. These are still built in small numbers in the north part of Ireland, and then mainly for fun or for leisure around the place. They're great to do with groups and schools and demonstrations. So the lath framework with a double gunnel is probably, you'll see in a few minutes, is the one that probably did a lot of the long journeys. The double gunnel is a sort of acts like a rolled steel joist, and all the strength comes from the gunnel, where other boats it usually comes from the keel. And this is where people who mightn't look closely enough, there's been lots of money wasted on people building reproductions and doing big voyages with ones they build like a basket, but the back just breaks. So it's kind of an upside, it's also built upside down, and it's the actual gunnel that gives you the strength. The coverings are in leather. There's probably a dozen leather boats I know of, and I've just been told about loads in France. I'm always interested in leather boats because obviously they're closest if you're trying to work out the mileage, load capacity or whatever. You want to obviously look at the leather boats. So I'm always interested in leather boats. Canvas and fiberglass, and now they're using ballistic nylon. As well as being covered in fiberglass, which is the main boat that's used now for fishing industry. They also have made plugs in actual GPR, and they've also now making a ginormous one out of plastic. They are so much plastic. I don't know where they're going to bury them. They'll survive a nuclear disaster. So this is the idea. This is if you're driving the Atlantic Way. This is the typical 2 guys going out in the afternoon or on the Sunday, going out to their lobster pots. And this is the thing you see most. There are full-time fishermen as well, but this is where it's most used. We had a huge amount of vernacular craft in use for salmon fishery that was basically, I think, right throughout Europe, stopped in 2006 for conservation reasons. And there's an enormous amount of these large boats, and this is actually a plug. There was about 20 of these. Now, there's this other, my folklife friends and folklorists are always interested in this, that if you're going to use this much fiberglass, you don't build an ancient currach. You build something, that's modern, and you've got some naval architects has designed. But no, they still take the exact boat they're used to, and they spend a lot of money on fiberglass. So it's just an interesting, it's kind of, they're very conservative, not just fishermen, but boat people in general. And this is probably the future, and is people going out leisure. So I just missed the support group for Irish currachs they meet twice a year, and they were just meeting last week, and 70 people turned up, and loads of them brought their boats. They were in Kilkee the other day. The thing I want to show you here is the oars. So these oars have no blades. The oars, the way they're attached to the boats are different in the 14 different styles, but the blades are pretty much the same. They're bladeless oars, and people say, they don't catch the wind. I mean, I've done international rowing. But what you can do with these, you can row all day. I mean, you can just row. There's no kind of big resistance. And it's called tipping along. These also race as well, so they go about 4 times faster when they're racing. But you can basically go, 10 miles, no problem. But you mightn't be a very strong person. So these are very, very easy to use. And this is the classic way that they carry them. So because the bottom are fragile, they're always lifted clear of the water. So it's not just the boat, it's also knowing how to handle them. So I sort of chose, they were most likely used in the Mesolithic and the Bronze Age. McGrail says multiple heights could be joined since the Mesolithic times, but I'm going from where we have some evidence. So we have, in Ireland and across Europe, there's these voyage tales. Their origin was in the Iron Age. I'm sure they're in Scandinavia. Then they were kind of Christianized, but they're all pretty much the same. They're voyages to wondrous lands, the promise of youth. The young wife of the king or the chieftain sails off with the young knight, Tristan and Isolde, Arthur. They're all the same. What they do give us in Latin is very good little descriptions of curraghs. And they also talk about 3-hide boats, 9-hide boats. I've kind of worked out where all these are. The Romans left us some very nice literature. And then in Ireland, we're kind of down at the gunnels with early Christian stuff. We have entire conferences on nothing but early Christian lore. So we know these guys were moving around in boats, and some of them clearly say they were moving around in the 5th, 6th century in leather boats. So this has been shown before. So the first actual tangible evidence we have is probably this Breucher boat, which is in the National Museum, and she's tiny. She's like a kingfisher. You go to see the big blue fish, and she's this size. She's absolutely beautiful. She's like a bit of jewellery. Clearly a sailing boat, very similar to Andaman's Life of Columkill, what they sailed in. You can see that the monks, this would have taken a crew of 12. 90% of archaeologists say this is a skin boat, but our keeper of antiquities from the museum says it could be a plank boat. So it's up for discussion. The Bantry boat, which Tim Severn bases, this is an 8th century pillar stone on the west of Ireland. And this is clearly, there's loads of drawings. It's got very eroded. It should be taken in and covered up. Since I started looking at it, you can hardly see it now. There's been lots of drawings of this. There's 4 guys rowing. There's passengers, and they're sitting on the bottom of the boat. And if you see now, if people are traveling in the boat, they don't sit on the thwarts. If you're not rowing, you sit on the bottom and bring the center of gravity low. This is a really important thing in these boats. So the other thing too, the boats aren't in isolation as a physical boat. It's the environment they're working in. So I did a lot of work, God, this is 25 years ago. Kerry is just beautiful, and the sea, but it's a dynamic environment. So this is quite a famous place, and this is the kind of place that they're working off. So harbourless areas, there is like a slipway here, but in most times there's waves lapping on this. These are portable boats, and offshore here are islands called the Blasket Islands, which were supposedly one of the last places of the old Celtic lore. And in the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, anthropologists and folklorists came in their droves to study these people. They were studied like that. They were like zoo animals at one stage. People recorded them. They didn't say much about the boats, but the boat was part of their experience. So they usually have a couple of paragraphs. My God, they wanted me to get into this, skin thing. It was like I was sitting on the sea. There's marvelous descriptions. There's great descriptions of people going out to the Aran Islands. So I'm often reading this not for the anthropological side, but reading their ledgers, because they're giving descriptions of how these boats went to the island. So because they're such an odd shape, they've never really been... Hornell did do drawings of them, but they weren't full lines plans with a table of offsets. So I've just been talking to here, and we were talking, this is what you want, This is what you can do the magic with if you want to project back to the past, the future, the load carrying. And back 25 years ago, we were looking at pen, paper, and calculator to work these out. So there was a lot of stories. This is the 4-man boat in Kerry I'm talking about here now. So it was always said that they carry a ton of fish and they're still stable. So I added in a ton of fish. So if you've got 4 men and a ton of fish, they're actually they're actually unstable, but you've got 3 men and about just under a ton of fish. They're pretty good. So here's a picture. This is the Blasket Islands. If you go online, there are hundreds of pictures of the Blasket Islands on these boats. You'll find a lot about the Aran Islands. You'll see 10 sheep in one of these boats. So you can see 3 guys and a cow. But just to tell you now, these cows in Kerry are called Kerry black cows, and they're probably an old breed, and they're around the size of ancient cows. I got onto the Department of Agriculture to get the actual weights at the time to load them in. These are probably slightly less than half the weight of a modern Charolais or a Limousin or whatever. They also carry horses. Now, there's quite small boats in Donegal that there's evidence of them carrying. So as we progressed on, I was involved, a lot of people here know I was involved in the Traditional Boats of Ireland, which was this very large book that we produced, but it was really the result of about 12 years of everybody working part-time, that we all had day jobs. And the recording methods improved. And even after the book was published, we had all found boats that we didn't know about or that should be recorded. And with the Heritage Council, we drew up this red list, and we looked at trying to record them before they were gone. And we saw, some of them were the last one or the last 6 of this type of boat. And I had currachs that I really wanted to do. This is the last known one of its type, owned by tidy towns. It's in the middle of a roundabout on the outside of a town. They wouldn't give it to the National Museum because they own it. So it's sitting there ready for somebody to drive into. So I thought, this is, if I'm going to, my first boat. So a lot of you have come across Pat Tanner. We'd set up a project with a laser scanning with a university, with a scientist, and it just didn't work out. It all just... So we ended up with a scanner and nobody to use it, and Pat Tanner came along and says, I'll give it a go. He was a boat builder and originally an architect. And this is the first boat that was ever scanned in the field. This is the point cloud data, and that he did lots of work from that, and he drew me a lines plan, and I sent it off to Nigel Nailing, and Nigel said, this can't be done. And Pat disappeared into the entire world of big time maritime archaeology, laser scanning some of the great boats of the world. So every so often when Pat was in between jobs, I would grab him, and we did a number of these boats. This was a triple thing between 3 different groups, and I was interested in load capacities because I know how fast all these can go. I have 3 different boats, so I know how fast I row with other people, so I know how fast they can go. I'm actually interested in load capacities, but other people are interested in how they react in the water, so it's quite interesting. So from the laser scan, you create lines plans, and then you can do all the hydrostatic data. When I had another little bit of funding then, I particularly wanted to scan the oldest known boat, most primitive. So I know we're completely biased. If you've got a Kerry currach, you're completely biased that it's the best skin boat in the world. But this is from the north coast, and this is most likely I mean the peasants in a nice way. Peasant really means somebody who earns their living from the land and the sea. So this, you can see it's very fragile. This is an 1890s, the Green collection. Again, these are all online from these are owned in Northern Ireland by one of the heritage people. So she's made completely of hazel, some willow. Some of the boats, these people had nothing. I mean, this was built 10 years after the Irish famine, when people were starving to death. 2 million emigrated. You're talking, like the Scottish clearances, you're talking people who had very little. So every scrap of wood would have been, because the wood and the seaweed was owned by the British Crown, you were sent to jail if you picked seaweed, or the wood for firewood. The Coast Guard would arrest you. So often the gunnels were recycled driftwood. And there's some lovely ones in the National Museum. There's a beautiful one that's got a round ogive. It's a little small one, and it's all beautiful pieces that they must have spent a long time picking natural driftwood off the sea. So the oldest one is in the National Museum, folk life department in the west of Ireland, not the archaeology section. And this is actually not a picture of it, but we scanned it. And the great thing about scanning was she can't be moved, she's upside down. Scanning is completely uninvasive. And then the museum was delighted to get their boats scanned for free as well. So, again, this is much smaller. Can't remember all the stuff. So this is a very small boat. And we did some work. So what he came up with, 49 kilos, 80 kilo crew. And so easily one crewman could carry 380 kilos of cargo with 300 millimeter freeboard. I wouldn't like to be out in a 150 millimeter freeboard in the Atlantic Ocean. So, I mean, there's tons of data on all of these, just to give you a taste. That's the two-man, it's irrelevant here. So another thing that's worked on is replica voyages, because obviously, with my archery, I float between folk life, maritime archaeology, and heritage studies. All the money isn't doing reports. Anyway, so when I have time, I go back to this. So replica voyages, obviously with my maritime archaeology hat on, I want to know how early man, the interaction between Ireland, which at that stage was probably on the highway, between Iberia and France. My friend, we've a mutual, Jose Luca Mateus, sourced me Professor Romaro's work, which was done, a Spanish professor. He did it in the 70s. He suggested that skin boats from Galicia were working in the Iron Age, and the terrestrial archaeologists said, oh, this is all hypothetical. And it's only as time has gone on that obviously his idea it must have some truth. So he sourced that for me, which was great, and translated it. So these are big currachs, which is not, I think, only very large communities, war currachs were this size. We know the early Christian guys, when they went off as their 12 monks, the style, were using these boats. So this was running for about 20 years. It's called the Column Kill. They got their money to do with a Scottish-Irish peace project. And she did major voyages for about 5 years, running lots to Scotland, up and down to France and stuff. From France, a group came to my friends in Cork, and they built this. They went back to France, and they built a leather boat. And the two of them got together. So this is the Column Kill, and this is the leather boat. And they got together, and they went all over the place. I mean, they went around England, they went down to France, they went down to Galicia, and they weren't logging them for scientific voyages. So I was always gnawing them and picking out the bits, and where did you pull in, and stuff like this. So these have showed that boats of this size could easily sail, and I'll show you a few. But a lot of the work is done in these, and the group from Cork have done some amazing. These are guys who have day jobs. They're not professional rowers. And the group from Cork, I mean, they've just done some amazing voyages. Like, they've gone across the Irish Sea quite easily, numerous times to Scotland, in small boats, the type that two women might go to the shopping in or something like this, the same thing. So this was just another study I did. So as I say, it's a given. If you have a built environment on an island, and we have, these are just the early Christian sites on these islands. This is off the west coast. It's a given they were using a boat, and some of them are inshore enough that they were probably using dugouts easily. But there was an awful lot of traffic, so I took the early Christian sites here. There's also, it's littered with Iron Age promontory forts here too. And I talked to I just cut these fishermen all in their 80s, 90s, who remembered moving around before outboard engines, and I was able to track. So they can't go A to B. So sometimes to get from one island, they have to go back into shore and then back out, depending on the currents. So I tracked all of this, and I used databases to keep it all. That's just a little, but to track all this. So that's just what they were capable of. Long distance voyages. I was asked to give a talk to the Celtic people about the possibility boats could have been used in whatever, Celtic times. So I said, well, so these are all real voyages, all done in currachs on this one. And these are just a few. This guy, a poet, rowed around Ireland, and he took 48 days. The 12-man leather, the French one, took 40 days. So you see, there's not a huge difference. One guy rowing, 12 guys rowing, They also, those 2 big boats I showed you, they also did this trip. I did shore support. I went to wave them off here in St. Michael's Mont. The Laird put them up. And you wait for a window, of course. You don't take these boats out and you wait for a window. We've got westerly winds 250 days a year. So these are all reaches. These are all very easy sailing. And even in a modern boat, this is the way you sail. You go down this way. So you don't sail this way or you don't sail up there. If you are going in a modern yacht down to Galicia or going to France, you come down from Dublin, where all the boats are, into Cork. You do your shakedown, you buy your groceries, and then you sail. My husband's done this a few times, straight into La Coruña. Very short trip. Or a little slightly harder around Land's End. But there's always the Scillies. The Scillies are there as your little base. And of course, this was the great the Bronze Age tin route. I'm not allowed to mention the Bronze Age because I have all the proof from the early Christian time. So there's just some journeys. It's a week to Iona. Even in the best weather, they always get stuck. So from north of Ireland, although it's only very close here, it's a very difficult journey. So depending on the weather, you either go to the Mulligan Tyre or you go straight to Islay. It's just a choice. And they always get stuck somewhere. And there's all these famous places. St. Columkill's Cave, St. Columkill's, the Curragh. There's Port na Curragh everywhere up this coast, where these are places traditionally they pulled in. It's in the lore. So these are replica voyages. Some I've done myself, some have been done in other boats. So the really interesting one for the audience here, this is obviously the coast of France. There was a group, Glenanne Sailing, set up by French resistance after the war, and they had a base in Ireland for 50 years. And they had, their first boat was these things called Corsairs, which are 5.5 metre boats with a water line of under 5 metres. And they're great for sailing. They're rough, small boats. And every year for 40 years, they sailed down to Glenanne's Islands here or to another base here. And they have great stories. They have no engines. These boats have no engines whatsoever. So these guys that I know well all were sailing these boats for, this is 40 years. If you could only have collected this data, people without engines. And again, only the very odd time did they pull into the Scillies, only the very odd time. But they always waited for the weather window. So I've done this myself. There's actually a new pilgrimage here. Just this part of coastline where I have a little holiday home. The Irish Sea here, there's very little tidal range. That's why there's always great shipping here across. So it's a kind of a straight run across. This has been done in a curragh, anywhere between 11 and 16 hours. This one here has been done numerous times as well. This is quite difficult. This is Dublin to Holyhead. And Anglesey is notorious for these fast currents. Much easier to cross here. And there's a whole early Christian, St. Aidan, who eventually went to Lindisfarne. He studied with St. David. There's a big connection here. And there's new. And this is the ones I go to Scotland every year, and I've basically tracked voyages to Shetland. My husband is very patient, and he owns a camper van, and he reads books about the war. So, reasons for continuity of use? Well, they're very seaworthy boats. They're versatile. They're simple construction. They're cheap-ish. Ease of launching and recovery, which is important. I mean, 2 people, I can't lift my own boat myself, but 2 of us can. And you can't put it on the roof, but I got a specially made trailer. These are built for this environment. They're very economical for full-time fishermen. So if the guys can build a boat during the winter and that's going to last them 10 years or so, it's very economical to do a part-time fishery. Where if they have to invest in a £20,000 fiberglass boat and all the gear, selling lobsters and crabs to the tourists is not going to be very viable. Racing and leisure now is growing up. There's about 100 racing boats. You wouldn't take the racing boats out to sea. They have no free board. They're cut down just like all racing. But, it's great. It's probably the only contact some of these maritime communities are going to ever have, the younger people, with their maritime tradition, because they're never going to go to sea. And the really important thing is the knowledge to build and use these curraghs is still within the community, and it's been actively transmitted and disseminated. The future, numbers are decreasing. The fishing community is aging, especially the builders. Leisure use is increasing. There's various support groups. There's increasing public interest. And I put this in, guy's taken over the folklife department. He's opening up this gallery of, he did give me a better picture to substitute, and I just didn't have time. And he just wanted me to say about this gallery is opening. They're going to have quite a big, this beautiful purpose-built museum onto an old chateau in the west of Ireland is got all our folk life, including fishing equipment. It's a very nice, it's in a parkland, it's in a beautiful place. So if you're just in boats or fishing, it's worth going, and they're going to have this formally opened. And this is probably, along with a guy who has a private set of, this is probably one of the few places you'll see nearly every Curragh style. Last year, I think I mentioned that Niall, I dragged him into do a workshop on logboats for the NAS. So in return favour, we organised a building of a Dunfanaghy, a Donegal style. This suits building in the open. It's one of the few that's still used a lot, but they still use hazel. It's actually a combination of laths and hazel. So it's very easy to build. You can build it with hand tools. Very good for demonstrations. I offered 1 or 2 places to ask people, and they grabbed it. Jerry Cross wants to build a fleet of these in Cardiff, and he was just fantastic, wasn't he? He just came out, he was just a volunteer, and sure, he was fantastic. This is Padraig O'Dineen, who was an engineer working in America, and said, I'm going back to build boats. And he's been 30 years, and he's been part of this whole revival. He's also, the boats are also very much tied in with the Irish language, and there's like little subtleties and names and parts, so he's a fluent speaker, and there's a little world that, I mean, we all have Irish, I don't know how good Carl's is, we all learned in school, but unless you're a native speaker, you miss those little nuances. We also had advertised this, it was advertised, now we were in a very remote place, it's up a mountain 8 miles from the nearest town in the west of Ireland. It's in Bonan Park that Niall is an archaeological advisor to. It's a community non-profit group, and they have this beautiful bit of archaeology in a beautiful parkland. And we had advertised a kind of a tutorial. It was going to be credits for your CPDs or whatever. And I think 6 archaeologists turned up. And then we had a guy from Australia, a boat builder, and from Maine, who's an archaeologist from Australia, and a First Nations couple from British Columbia who were involved in boats, and they came to talk about it. But the thing that really surprised us was the public. This is in a really remote, you have to drive here. It's in over 200 people came through over the weekend. It was just phenomenal. Families, the kids came back every day to see the progress. Now I had a miniature coracle, and we had a coracle finished, and I was I had all my skins and stuff hanging up. We were really surprised at the public. So this is the first kind of, now there's been loads of Curraghs built. It's the first one, I think, in 21 years that's been actually focused on an open-air exhibition. The museum were the last people to run one. And what we were really knocked out with was the public, wasn't it? I mean, it was just amazing. And they came back day after day, some of the kids. Now, we were doing tea and coffee and drinks, but so we had this lovely social weekend. But yeah, so that was really surprising. This interest from the general public, because we kind of like, sort of aimed at, we thought professional archaeologists are going this is a great opportunity, but yeah. So it was a real surprise. So, just want to thank Noel Campbell, Assistant Keeper of the National Museum, for lots of, I always bounce ideas off him. Padraig O'Dineen, who's been in the background all the time, who's helped me build boats and given me, advice and stuff. And I'd just like to thank Neil for inviting me to join the group and for all the support and stuff, and I think the fun we had last year between Nass and Bonan. So thank you. Oh, that's what, reuse of boats. I thought, I bet none of you have one of these. This is a bus stop in Dingle. Thank you very much. Has been voted the coolest bus stop in the world.
So not just winning world awards, but also cool bus stops. So that's great. Thanks very much, Doreen. We're certainly looking forward to the Curragh going out in the water and seeing it on its maiden voyage. Our next speaker is Yana Anichenko, and just a little bit about her. She's based in Anchorage Museum there in Alaska, and she studied at East Carolina University and is project director for Envisioning Alaska. She's a Russian-American historian and an anthropologist, originally from St. Petersburg, but she now lives in Dutch Harbour and Anchorage. She's also held curatorial positions in the museums of the Aleutians, Anchorage Museum, the Smithsonian Institution, and Alaska State Office of History and Archaeology. So we're very privileged to have her. But a quick message to Jana, because I know she's online and she's watching through YouTube's. We sent you an email there, second last email I sent you for the Teams meeting link. So I don't know if you've got that, but if you can log into that, please, Jana, and keep your microphone off, please, until the discussion group, when that happens at the end of this session. So we can start Jana's presentation, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for including me in this conference. My presentation today is about open skin boats of the Aleutian chain, Alaska. In full disclosure, the boats I'll be talking today are not that ancient, but it's my hope that the juxtaposition of material record with recent and current history of boat use may be informative for my colleagues, particularly for understanding the meaning of vernacular watercraft for people's identity. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Aleutian Islands. This is a chain of more than 200 islands, stretching from Alaska Peninsula almost all the way to Kamchatka, Russia. In my biased opinion, a place of unparalleled beauty. This is ancestral land and waters of Unangach, or Aleut people. Unangach translates as people of the sea. These islanders are experts of their marine environment. Traditional subsistence and diet are 95% marine-based and include sea life resources ranging from sea urchins and shellfish to halibut, seals, sea lions, and whales. Before the contact with the European technologies, the all Unangach maritime activities relied on two types of skin boats: decked individual hunter kayaks, or ikiach, and open, undecked, communal large boats called nigelach. Frames of these watercrafts were traditionally constructed with driftwood, lashed with animal sinew, and covered with marine mammal skins. Geological evidence attests that people of the Aleutian Islands were using watercraft from at least 9,000 years before present, and likely even earlier. But the earliest direct archaeological evidence of skin boats from the Aleutian Islands comes from the site which dates to circa 890 AD. A big change came to the Aleutian Islands in the second half of the 18th century, when, after the Captain Vitus Bering's expedition to Alaska in 1741-1743, Russian merchants and seafarers began annual hunting expeditions to the islands, opening the door to Russian colonization of the Aleutian chain and Alaska mainland. Hunters and seafarers came looking for pelts of marine fur-bearing animals such as sea lions and specifically sea otter. Archaeologists estimate that through the direct conflict and introduced deprivation and diseases, the indigenous population of the Aleutian Islands was reduced by 50 to 75%. Came under pressure, and new materials, ideologies, and socio-political realities were introduced and forced on local population. Interestingly, Aleutian ikiach was one aspect of local indigenous culture that almost every European passing through the region noted and complimented. It was reported to be the fastest kayak type in Alaska and even in the entire circumpolar north. A good number of historic drawings and actual boats collected in the 18th and 19th centuries provide a great insight into this boat type construction, details, and function. to kayaks, the open-skin boats of the Aleutian Islands remain somewhat a mystery. The earliest representation of these boats comes from 1769, when Russian artist Mikhail Levashov drew two open-skin boats he observed on Unalaska Island. Curiously, his album depicts two very different types of boats. One, on your right, is what is known as a discoid boat with a discoid stem, and another to your left with a spoon-shaped bow. So the spoon-shaped bow is actually signed on Levashov's drawing as spider, and the other boat type became known as Nihilach. Two boats differ from each other. Each of them resembles a boat type of different cultural group. The discoid split bow is characteristic to the boats of Sugpiaq people of Kodiak archipelago east of the Aleutian chain, and the spoon boat type resembles boats of Koryak people of Kamchatka about 2,000 miles west of Unalaska. Here are two models representing the Baidar type. One on the top was collected in 1837 on Unalaska Island, and the one on the bottom was collected in 1898, and it was made by a Koryak boat model maker in Kamchatka, on Kamchatka Peninsula. And you may also notice that the Baidar model on the top actually is fitted for oars and for a rudder. Words about the connection between these three cultures, Unangach, Sugpiaq, and Koryak. Unangach and Sugpiaq people occupied the neighboring lands and waters. They had a lot of contact. They worked, they traded, they traveled. We have archaeological evidence and oral traditions supporting that. And if you look at the kayak types, the one on the top here, for example, is Unangach, one on the bottom is Sugpiaq. You can see that they follow the same kind of a technological pattern of having a split bow. So these boats, while have a number of differences, are also similar. However, when we look at the connection between Aleut people, Unangach people, and Koryak people of Kamchatka, there is no evidence whatsoever of direct or indirect communication. In fact, the chain of islands between Kamchatka and Aleutian Islands, which is it's not a chain, it's a group of islands, Commander Islands, did not have any evidence of prehistoric occupation. How did these two very different boat types ended up in the same location on the Aleutian chain? So we have two different sources, or two different lines of evidence. One comes from Russian written records from about middle of 18th century, from manuscript written by Timofey Shmolев, who was one of the traders to the islands and Russian official. And he wrote about how when Russians first began coming, the last port of exit was on Russian mainland was Kamchatka, and they were initially bringing smaller plank boats with them to go around the islands, but learned that it was very cumbersome and difficult to maintain, and decided to bring indigenous boats instead of skin boats. So they would bring the frames of Baidaras or open skin boats of Koryak people and then assemble them on the Aleutian Islands, cover them with skins, and use them for their hunting expeditions. And such boats were quite sizable and could fit up to 6 or even 8 people. important piece of information comes from indigenous oral tradition. It's not really documented anywhere in writing, but the people of the Aleutian Islands have the lore that when Russians arrived to the islands, they destroyed all the large open-skin boats to control the villagers and restrain their mobility. So they couldn't leave with the families. The smaller hunting crafts, such as kayaks, were really important to the Russian colonizers because they employed the skills of indigenous men for seawater hunting, and kayak provided the ideal platform for such hunt. The statement, the sentiment that fueled a resurgence of interest towards building this type of open-skin boats, or as they're called in the language, nigelach. This became a symbol of walking away from colonial influences, of regaining the indigenous identities, and regaining the control over the destiny of indigenous people. The problem with the Aleutian Islands, with this specific watercraft, is that there is virtually no evidence of or representation of this boat beyond the drawing I've already showed, and this drawing right here, which is also was made by a Russian artist in 1804. And this is kind of a more detailed constructional drawing which is used currently to build Nihilach and the Aleutian Islands. The problem is that if you look closely at the origin of this drawing, it was made on the Alaska Peninsula. And the Alaska Peninsula is the area where Sugpiaq people and Unangach people merged and coexisted for a long time, side by side. So there is actually no direct evidence which would attest that this drawing was a drawing of Unangach Nihilach. It may have been a drawing of a Sugpiaq boat. Nonetheless, the revitalization of building Nihilach is going very strong right now. Just in 2023, there were 4 boats built in 4 communities, and this project involved probably about hundreds of people. It's really difficult to estimate how many people participated. The master boat builder behind this initiative, or in the middle of this initiative, is Mark Daniels, and you could see him sitting low next to the frame of the boat on the image on the left side, right next to the paddle blade. Mark works with indigenous people of Aleutian Islands, but he himself is not indigenous and very open about his role and his participation in this initiative. Boats are not built of driftwood. I should probably say that very few parts of the boat frame are built of the driftwood currently, and they're not covered by the marine mammal skins. Rather, they are covered by the special aircraft canvas, which is also waterproofed and a good substitute to marine mammal skins. It's a very important moment in history of Unangach people. It's very well received, very well covered. There are many emotional testimonies about the importance of bringing the boat from basically the if not complete oblivion, then at least from 200 years of lack of use. There is some archaeological potential to learning more about the Aleut boat finds, and maybe we will find out more about the construction of Nihilach. This is an interesting site. It's a Kanaga cave finds, and you could see that that big piece of walked wood, which an individual on the right is holding, is likely the fragment of the prow of large open skin boats, and some other fragments of skin boats are also found in different caves and different terrestrial archaeological sites. So we are likely to find out more about prehistoric skin boats and hopefully incorporate that knowledge into building, rebuilding, revitalizing skin boat tradition. To the second boat type, the one which is likely introduced by Russians, the one which is connected to the Koryak people. Unlike Nihilach, which we just looked at, this boat type is really well represented all across the board. It's in images, it's in models, and I'll show you some of the surviving examples of this boat a little later. Some of the models are both early and well detailed, have a wealth of information. Such things as not just how the boat looked, how it was constructed, but how it was used. This is a boat model from Commander Islands. It's in Kunstkamera in St. Petersburg, Russia, and it was made in the 1890s. But what's unique about this model is it's full of figurines which appear to have almost a portrait resemblance to different people. They're accurately dressed and kind of give you an idea of a hunting party and people involved in hunting parties. So a bit of a socio-economical and personal take on how these boats were used. Models which depict people wearing traditional clothes and bentwood hats, which have a lot of information about social status of people. For example, this particular model has a chief, an individual at the bow, which has a chief's hat, and individual at the stern, also in a chief's hat. So it tells you more about the leadership in the boat crew and navigation too. And the evidence goes beyond that. The historic photographs from different regions of the Aleutian Islands and Commander Islands tell us that this specific boat type, Baidar, was used from 1750s all the way into 1880s on the Commander Islands, on the Pribilov Islands. Pribilovs were probably the last place where these boats were used. They were used for hunting, for moving cargo, and for moving people. The most recent example of how these boats were used was like a ferry between St. Paul and St. George Island. And there are quite a few people in both islands, in St. George and St. Paul, who still remember traveling in these boats. So it's still in the very recent human memory. These images of Baidars on St. Paul and St. George Island, the image in the center and on the top depicts about, I think if you look close, there would be about 5 large Baidars on the coast, on the shore of, this is St. Paul, and you could see that these boats, the skins of these boats were repaired frequently, and these skins are still sea lion skins. The images on the bottom and on your right depict the same type of the boat, may even be the same frame, but in this case they're covered by canvas. So the top image is circa 1880s, and the image on the bottom and the image on the right are 20th century, circa 1960s. So useful in Pribilof Islands that they were actually commissioned by the local American government, and they were built on the same plan, and they were not built of driftwood anymore at this point. The wood was specially delivered from California and occasionally from the East Coast. What's amazing to me is that there are still surviving examples of these bidars. There are only 5 in existence to the best of my knowledge. 3 of them I got to see on St. Paul. They are, as you can see, indoors. This is a big municipal warehouse where they are stored at least out of elements and in a somewhat specially allocated place, which is of two kind of in less ideal condition compared to the previous one. Fascinating about these boats, when you take a closer look, it's an interesting combination of traditional technologies such as lashing with more contemporary materials. For example, you can see the use of the metal fasteners, and you can also notice that the cover is canvas. Boat frames, bidar boat frames on St. George Island, maybe 2.5. It's hard to tell because these boats are in such a state of disrepair. As you can see, they are outside, and there is actually a shed with little kind of like almost like a spare boat parts kept inside, but the frames outside are fallen apart and seemingly not protected in any way. So the reason for longevity of these boats on Pribilof Islands was that for longest time the harbor in both islands was too shallow to accommodate large ships. So the only way to bring goods to the community would be to use those large skin boats and now canvas boats to offload the ships into the canvas boat into bidar and bring it to the shore. And the same way, when people traveled from one island to another, before aviation became more accessible, the bidar also provided the best platform. By that time, by 1980s, they were not oared or propelled on their own. They functioned as barges, and they were basically towed between different points by a little tugboat. Picture of a bidar frame sitting in a graveyard on St. George Island, and as you can see from the state of it, it's probably not going to last much longer. I want to repeat that this is one of only 5 surviving boats of this type in the world. This boat type is loved and remembered in the community. People don't just remember traveling in those boats, they remember their parents and grandparents building them, and those are connected to several very significant events in Onondaga recent history. However, what these boats are lacking is the connection to that pre-colonial identity, and without that, the interest to preservation of these boats also seems to be lacking. So in conclusion, what is the lesson of these two boat types? Well, first of all, I think that it's an interesting case study of a transfer of indigenous technology from one ethnic group to another by colonial power. And it's interesting that this technology was embraced fairly fast and survived the presence of Russian colonies in Alaska in the case of Baidar. I think another conclusion we can draw from looking at the story of these two boats is that boats do have extremely strong connection to the indigenous identities. And in case of Nihilach, this indigenous identity right now is driving the revitalization of the boat type, and also is probably re-envisioning, creatively reinterpreting that boat. Another one is more research is needed on pre-colonial skin boats, and we are working on it and hope to learn more from that. And the last but not least is that there is an urgent need for conservation of surviving Baidars, and I hope that in the future we will see some movement in that direction. Well, thank you so much for your attention, and I hope to get some questions. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Yana. It's very enlightening presentation, and it's good to see some more presentations coming from the other side of the Atlantic and that connection between Siberia and Alaska. Our next speaker is Mikhail Fauvel. He's in London University, but he's worked extensively globally, including at the other side of the Atlantic as well. He's worked in Mexico, Guatemala, California, and of course Scandinavia as well. And he's currently directing a research project called Complex Canoes, working through museum collections in Scandinavia to reanalyze Bronze Age boat fragments. He's also a project member of Maritime Encounter, studying long-distance interactions across the Atlantic coast of Europe. So right now I'll be talking on matters of watercraft and complex social interactions. So carry on, thank you.
Great, thank you for that introduction, and I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to talk here today. Also, I never had the opportunity to meet Meren, but I thank him for organizing this as well. And also thanks to all of you for sticking around for the final talk of the day. It's been a very exciting and interesting couple of days, and now we're almost at the end. So I'll start off by saying that I am not a maritime archaeologist. I'm a traditional old-fashioned dirt archaeologist, terrestrial archaeologist, if you will. But my whole career I've been very interested in island and coastal environments. In fact, I've almost exclusively worked in island and coastal environments. And I've also always been very interested in the role of maritime technologies in shaping social trajectories and possibilities for societies. So what I'm going to be talking about today is maybe a little bit different, but is focused on trying to understand how boats in different, very similar contexts shape possibilities for complex economic and political formations. So the connection between watercraft technologies and the formation of chiefdoms, which is really one of my primary research interests. And I'll be talking about this in the context of Scandinavia, Southern California, and also a little bit in Japan. So the goals for the talk, as I was sort of saying, I'm interested in boats, and I'll be talking mostly today about sewn plank boats. So a slightly more complex type of boat, but also I'll be talking a little bit about skin boats as well towards the end of the talk. How these technologies and the material resources, the labor resources, and the knowledge that goes into them can create bottlenecks in the formations of different types of complex societies. So part of the background for this project or what I'm presenting today is part of this overarching maritime encounters project that was funded by the Swedish National Bank. And this is a very large research initiative that is trying to rethink these terrestrial biases, specifically in the context of Neolithic and Bronze Age Europe, and looking at how maritime pathways allowed social transformations across these time periods. One of the things that we're really interested in is the movement of copper and tin from Iberia, from around here, just south of here, up to Scandinavia, which was a massive enterprise that was almost certainly being conducted largely by boats, right? And this is something that we really need to focus more attention to and more time on, you know, what type of boats were people using to move all of these metal resources, and what did these maritime transports, maritime voyages, meetings and encounters do for the type of social organizations and societies that were engaging in these long-distance voyages. I think I put somewhere in the title here that I'm talking about complex watercraft. I want to paraphrase that a little bit and say that all watercraft are complex, right, in their own way. But what I'll be talking about a bit throughout this presentation is how certain types of boats, when you start having really sort of maybe restricted knowledge going into them, and maybe some resources that aren't very easy to get a hold of. For example, I'll talk about tars a lot in the context of Southern California. Really can lead to the possibility to monopolize the control and use of different types of watercraft, especially sort of watercraft that are earmarked for elite status. And you can see some examples of that on this slide. So boats that take high value resources and also highly specialized or maybe restricted knowledge. And one of the reasons why I'm really interested in this is that it can create positive feedback systems, right? Systems where maybe the end result of the process isn't something that's really envisioned from the beginning. And this is important for people like me who are interested in the formation of chiefdoms or the beginnings of social inequality and hierarchy, because no one really is going to willingly give up you know, some sort of social status, or at least I don't think that they would, right? So I'm interested in how can sort of maybe systems of hierarchy come about without people really understanding that that's where they're on their way to. And I think boats are one of these things, right? Where originally you're using boats for transport, for fishing, and you think this is great. I've got, you know, a new boat type, gets me there faster, allows me to carry more things. Not really thinking that maybe in a few dozen generations that these sort of more complex boats might be monopolized by a different group of people. So I'll be talking about 3 different case studies today. Most of my work has focused actually on Southern California. I've worked in California archaeology for about 15 years. Mostly with the Chumash region around modern-day Santa Barbara, but I've also worked all over Southern California. I'm not going to talk about Mexico today, but I'll be talking about Scandinavia as well, and I'll have a few examples from Hokkaido, which isn't really my own research, but one of my research collaborators, Peter Jordan, does a lot of work in Hokkaido and has contributed to this overarching project. So the grounds for comparison here is that these are all what I would call maritime chiefdoms. They're societies that have complex hierarchical political organizations, are sedentary, and have evidence of long-distance voyages. And in all 3 of these cases, we're talking about sewn plank canoes. And again, I promise I'll talk a bit about skin boats at the end of the talk as well. So we'll start in Southern California, which is there. The period that I'm going to be talking about today is what we call the late period in Southern California chronology, which is from about 500 CE to 1782, which is when the Spanish built a fort in modern-day Santa Barbara. this corresponds exactly to when we think that people were using plank canoes in the region. And just really quickly, this is the Chumash region is an area where we see some settlement hierarchy. We're talking about chiefdoms of a few thousand people. Lots of evidence for hierarchy, craft specialization. We could talk a lot about this, but we'll focus on the boats. So here's an example of a Chumash Tamol. South of the Chumash region, people built a very similar boat called the Tiat in the Tongva territory of modern-day Los Angeles. This is a boat that was built in 1911 by a man called Ferdinand Labrado for an anthropologist, J.P. Harrington. This was the first boat of its kind that had been built in around 50 years. So Ferdinand Labrado built this from memory. His father, when he was a child, had been a master boat maker, and the tradition had lapsed for several decades. And he built this boat together with J.P. Harrington as an example of this traditional knowledge. You can see here that it's a sewn boat, right? So it's being made from, in this case, redwood logs, which are split using stone tools. So you can definitely build log boats or plank boats with stone tools. They're being lashed together with cordage, in this case made with milkweed, and then very critically caulked or waterproofed using a mixture of 60% natural bitumen and 40% pine pitch, which was called yop in the Chumash language. So this is a constructed sewn plank boat with no internal frames. This is a replica today, and people are still paddling these. Chumash people are still building these now and paddling them out to the islands that are off the coast. You can see they're about 9 meters long and can get a crew of, well, this one has, 6 people on it, but they can carry a few more people as well. As I mentioned before, one of the critical materials that goes into tamols and tiats is the waterproofing tars, right? That's really important if you have a sewn boat, because to build a sewn boat, you need to drill a bunch of holes into your boat to sew them together. And of course, water can go through those holes, so you need a lot of tar to make sure that your boat is nice and waterproof. And as I mentioned, indigenous people in Southern California use bitumen or natural tar to waterproof their boats. If you've ever seen There Will Be Blood, right, or other Western movies, you know that California has lots of oil. If you've ever been to Los Angeles and walked on the beach, you might have gotten some of this oil on your feet. But this is natural oil that seeps through the ground. And critically, in Southern California, there are only large seeps or places where you can mine tar in 5 different places. McKittrick is the sort of famous oil well that's sort of like the There Will Be Blood setting out in the desert. That was in Yokuts territory. We know ethnohistorically that they mined tar and traded it to the coast for people to build boats. And then there are 4 sort of more coastal sites at La Brea, Carpinteria, Goleta, and Price Canyon. And not so surprisingly, some of the largest chiefly centers are located at these places, I suggest, because they were able to control tar and, by extension, the production of boats. Unfortunately, tar or yop is quite, it can be sourced, but it's a very complex material, especially since it is being mixed with pine pitch. So you've got 2 very similar chemical materials being mixed together, which makes it much harder for us as scientific archaeologists to try to source, but it is possible, and I've done some sourcing work. It seems I don't have that slide, but you can match these materials to locations, and I've been able to match tars that are from boat remains found on the islands to coastal sites to show that this trade was something going on. And you can see up there on the top right, the 2 artifacts on the left there are what we call canoe plugs. So those are the drill holes in the boat, right, that have been filled with tar. All the wood is gone, but what we have left are those plugs of tar that were caulking those drill holes that were used to sew together those planks. I want to talk a little bit about other boat types. I think that we talked a lot about log boats, plank boats, skin boats, etc. But I think that these categories exist sort of in our minds, and there are a lot of mixing and matching and experimentation of different combinations. This is a type of boat that was used in northern Mexico, so I am talking about Mexico. This is a site I worked on a long time ago. This is published by Matthew Delorier. And this is a composite boat, right? So this is probably something that was similar to what would have been used before they started building plank boats in Southern California. It's a dugout core with reed bundles tied to the side. This is an extremely seaworthy craft. It was used to go out on very rough seas over fairly long distances. The problem, the drawback, though, is that it's quite slow, right? So it won't sink. It can carry a lot of cargo over a long distance, but it's not going to get you there very fast. And there's some evidence that similar types of boats to this might have been built quite early on, maybe even in the early Holocene, on the islands off the coast of Southern California. What were these boats being used for? Well, they were being used to trade all sorts of prestige goods and other items. I'm not going to get into this too much because this is deviating a little bit from boats, but on the Channel Islands, shell beads were being produced, and that was used as currency in really across the American West. And these were being traded in boats from the islands to the mainland coast and then beyond across the American West. And that's sort of the basis of this complex economic system, right? Without boats, without being able to control the production of fast seaworthy boats, you wouldn't be able to finance this very important long-distance, very productive exchange system. Moving now to Scandinavia. Of course, the most famous example of the types of boats that are the sewn boats used in Scandinavia is the Hjortspring boat that you can see here on the right, and that also represented in rock art across the region, right? So other than the Hjortspring boat, we don't have any examples of Bronze Age stone boats, and in fact, as you all know, I'm sure the Hjortspring boat is from the early Iron Age, not really from the Bronze Age, but based on the similarity to the rock art, we believe that this is the type of boat that was being used in Scandinavia during the Bronze Age. Of course, it's very hard to find intact boats. The Hjortspring find is a phenomenal find. But what we do have are fragments of boats. So one of the things I'm working on right now is going through museum collections to find some of these boat fragments. These are all, these here are from 3 different sites. They're all fragments from sewn boats, sewn plank boats. They were all collected in the early 20th century, sort of between the 1920s and 1940s. They're all pollen dated to the Bronze Age. Pollen dated, of course, pollen dating is not necessarily the most reliable method in the world. So one of the things that we're working on right now is C14 dating these to confirm those pollen dates and see if we actually do have some additional sewn boats actually dating to the Bronze Age, if we can confirm those pollen dates. This is probably the most likely candidate to be a Bronze Age boat. As you can see, the one on the bottom left there has some design elements that look suspiciously Viking, despite that pollen date. And then the boat on the right side there from Wittinge it looks suspiciously modern as well. But we're going to date them all. However, this one I think has a possibility of being old. It seems very old. It's not very scientific. And excitingly, it actually has some of the original cordage in those sewn holes there too. Another thing that's quite exciting about this boat is that it was found with this element. This was originally identified as a sleigh, and I'm talking about the picture in the middle, not the one on the left. We don't think it's a sleigh. We think, well, we're not entirely sure what it is, but one possibility is that it could be a mast fish. Right, so then on the left you have an example of a contemporary mast fish that's being used for a small traditional boat replica. The idea being with the 3 holes that you might want to reposition your mast in different conditions. And that would be quite exciting, especially since the use of the sail in Bronze Age Scandinavia is quite controversial. And I think I already sort of talked about this, but the background behind all of this is this idea of maritime connections in the Bronze Age, understanding what type of boats people would have been using to move all of this copper across the ocean up into Scandinavia. And then I want to talk a little bit about Hokkaido, and I think I might be running out of time, and I have quite a bit left to go, so I'm going to go a little quickly over this. Again, this isn't really my research area. This is coming from some of my collaborators. Hokkaido in the period from 500 to 1000 CE is where you have the Okhotsk culture. Very similar in a lot of ways to the other 2 groups I've talked about. We're talking about sedentary chiefdoms. Very maritime focused. You see some of the rock art, which is very similar to other rock art that we've seen, and also used sewn plank boats, right? So very similar boat technology to do some very similar types of maritime activities. The Ainu sewn plank boat is slightly different in that it has a dugout core, right? So this is a dugout hull that then has sewn planks added to the sides, and then also caulked and waterproofed and taken out to sea. Also, just like in the Chumash region, we have a strong tradition of contemporary indigenous people building these boats and taking them out. And just like in the other areas that we talked about, these were boats that were used for long-distance trade voyages, for raiding, and really for the expansion of economic activities across a very large area up the Amur River, and bringing resources back to Hokkaido from a very long distance. So these boat technologies really allowed for the expansion of these different societies over very large areas, and allowed for the transformation of traditional social organizations and networks into something, I would argue in all 3 cases, slightly more hierarchical. So I've already talked about some of the comparisons between these boats, right? The Scandinavian examples were one of the largest. The ones from Hokkaido, of course, had a dugout hull. So there are some differences, but ultimately I would argue that the technologies were quite similar and led to similar social political outcomes. Let's see here. And one way that we can think about this is through the framework of what's been called the maritime mode of production. So if you think about maritime societies and some of the labor organization and resource procurement that goes into organizing maritime societies, we can look at different characteristics and see if they compare across different regions. So I've sort of done that here, and this is coming from Johan Ling's work from Gothenburg. This is his model for Bronze Age Scandinavia on the right. And if we compare Scandinavia, Japan, and the Chumash region, you can see that a lot of these characteristics of sort of maritime chiefly type societies line up. The only ones that are really sort of different are the ones that have to do with slave taking. Slaves were not, slavery was not a practice in Southern California. But if you ignore those and just focus on the maritime trading and raiding and long-distance exchange and some of the political characteristics that went with it, I think you see a very striking pattern across those areas. And then, of course, I think I already mentioned this, but you see using long distance or these sort of more complex boat types, these core regions had impacts on much larger areas. So I know I'm running out of time, but I really quickly want to talk about sewn boats as well. So in the Neolithic, in the Baltic, we had, I would argue, a very lively situation with maritime hunters and gatherers groups lining all the sides of the Baltic and using very similar types of ceramics, very similar types of maritime traditions. I would, and you know, this opens up the question of what type of boats that they used. Another thing that I've sort of been arguing as part of this Maritime Encounters project is that we really have to say that they were most likely using skin boats. Of course, we don't have any evidence of this. This is direct evidence. This is the classic problem of, you know, you don't find intact boats very often unless they're log boats, but the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And I would actually say that we do have some evidence. So this is rock art from the Alta site in Norway. These are all examples of things that I would argue could easily be skin boats, just based on the shape. And if you sort of look at contemporary skin boats, you can see that in many cases they are slightly translucent, and you can see some of the frames or the ribs of the boats. So both me and some of my colleagues in the Maritime Encounters project have argued that these sort of ribbed or see-through rock art elements could potentially be representing skin boats. And in fact, we do have this very interesting element. This is a wood artifact that's been carbon dated to between 3,600 to 2,900 BC. Neolithic. It was originally interpreted as a ski as well, like the other artifact I showed earlier. But the bottom of this piece, and I apologize I don't have a better photo, I would very much like to get one, and I hope too soon, is very curved, right, which is absolutely not what you would expect for a ski. So one possibility is that this might be a very rare fragment from a skin boat frame dating to the Neolithic. Hard to say with 100% certainty, but it's definitely a possibility, and I think it's a very exciting one. So I wanted to share that with you as well. So just to conclude, I think that there's very strong connections between maritime technologies and political and economic possibilities of ancient societies. I think that looking at boats and the movement of goods in boats and the capacities that they allow for political manipulation is really critical if we want to understand how early systems of hierarchy developed. And I think that it's also critically important that we look more to maritime societies, coastal and island societies, because these pathways to complexity in maritime environments were really important and come up again and again around the world, just as often as sort of more traditional pathways focused on agriculture do. So maritime pathways to complexity, I think, critically important. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir in this room. So that's it. Thank you very much, and I have to thank the sponsors of this work, the Marcus and Amelia Wallenberg Foundation and Riksbankens Jubileumfond. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mikael. So one of the things that strikes me from the couple of days we've had in the conference here is that we as early watercraft practitioners tend to focus on dugout boats, but the very virtue of their durability, they survived the archaeological record, so it's very easy for us to focus on that. So it's great to see that we have that sort of shift moving over to other types of early watercraft, including the skin and the sun boats and so on. But it's not just that, it's also that there's the preponderance for the dugout boats to be predominantly freshwater craft. So we're actually entering into the saltwater environment with the presentations this afternoon, and the significance of travel and communication across the seas and oceans, for a trade economy, and conceivably within the prehistoric period. But it's also what this means, in terms of involving social hierarchies as well. So I think it's absolutely fantastic sort of session to finish with. So if we can have Dorina come down and join us for the discussion. And I'm also going to appeal to Jenna. Once again, please join us by the Microsoft Teams so that you can participate in the discussion. I have emailed you the link there now a few times, and it's also in the last email I have sent you. But also maybe if someone has her mobile number, they might send her a quick text message that you might receive this and join us. So I'll open it up to the floor, and if anyone has any questions. Okay, Carl.
Just a question for Dorina. In relation to those more recent voyages in the skin boats, how do the boats perform from rowing compared to sailing?
There's a whole lot of different things, so they don't. First of all, the timing. So the very important that you don't tie yourself to time, because you're going to get yourself in danger. Sometimes you have to wait for a few days to get the window. So, and I think early man is the same. So, first of all, it's choosing your slot. They mainly all set off prepared to sail or to row the whole way. And sailing is a bonus. That's, in most cases. So they're not planning their route, and that's why certainly the ones I was involved with, I went to wave at them from Land's End, and I met them. I got the ferry to Brest, So they were prepared. They had supplies for 3-4 days. They were prepared to row the whole way, and they got there before we got there with the traders, because the weather was perfect. They rowed for about 2 hours and sailed the rest of the way. So, the sailing is an added bonus. But anybody will sail. Even a lot of the small boats I've looked at in Ireland and England, the salmon boats, they all had these little tiny sails they put up as an auxiliary sail. That's where the sprit sail. It's another total tangent as I look at traditional sails. So the sprit sail can be stored away in the bottom of the boat. No shrouds needed. You basically stick whatever you have up, a small sail. It doesn't overpower the boat. It doesn't sail area is not very big. It just gives you that extra push. And naturally, it's people want to save energy. But sailing is the bonus. Yeah. But you would always say,
what type of speed are they getting with a sail compared to rowing?
Not a huge difference. Because rowing, they're extremely efficient to row. People are so skeptical. You have to get into one and row it. They are so smooth to row. And obviously sailing makes it a little slightly more tender for balance. But, I have tons of statistics. But the average is 4 miles an hour. You're talking 4 miles an hour, equivalent to walking speed. And I gave this at a medieval concert. I didn't. They asked me to talk about boats, except that they can carry a ton of I never mentioned sizes. So the one I did a lot of work on, which is a bit bigger than my own boat, is 7.5 meters. It's the standard 4-man and that's the one that can carry a ton. So a ton of ore, ton of fish. Equivalent to, right up to the 20th century in Ireland, a donkey and cart is, for pulling anything, turf in Ireland, coal elsewhere, or whatever, is only 1/4 of a ton. So a huge difference between moving stuff by boat and moving stuff by land. So the smaller, more fragile ones, 3 miles an hour on average, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick message to Jana. We apparently have technical issues at our end, and we're aware that you're trying to enter the Teams meeting, so I think this might be solved or not. We'll see how we progress with this, so if you can just bear with us, please. But perhaps you might be able to send anything by chat as well. So any other questions for our participants, or for our speakers, I should say? I have one here. I'm just a couple, I should say. I'm just interested and curious in relation to the variety of the boat types you've seen in different sort of locations and the use of materials. Obviously, within the modern sort of period, there's replacement materials, but before the modern era, if you like, did you see any sort of variation in the materials that are actually being used based on the different variations of boat types, or were they pretty much the same form of materials?
That's a question for me?
For both of you, yes.
Go ahead, yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I think you use the materials that you have, but there's a lot of. I mean, if you're building a sewn plank boat, then you need the planks, you need the material to sew them, you need the similar tools, and then you critically need something to waterproof them with, right? And that's probably where you have the most variation with different types or ratios of pine pitch and other types of caulking materials. Although pine pitch is a pretty common one.
I think there's probably a bigger variety in the coracles, which are kind of the inland waterways. And there you see some of them don't even use a skin. They might use like a mixture of muck, it's like straw with pitch, and they just jam it in. You see this in Vietnam and Cambodia. They jam it in and create a seal covering. But in Wales, they used wool, which stretches, and they covered it. So wool was around for, forever. So who builds a boat with a wool covering? But, you can see them in the museums in Wales. And so man was very clever. I think early man, we don't give them enough clever, I don't think I'd go out into the Irish Sea in a wool-covered boat, but...
Thank you very much. I've just a message for our IT personnel. Jana says that she's in the meeting's waiting room and is waiting for someone to admit her. So... It's not connecting there. Okay. So Jana, please bear with us. We're trying to fix this issue. Okay. So if we can carry on, and we have any other questions for our speakers? Okay, I'm going to take the opportunity and throw in another one there, indulging myself. I'm very interested in relation to the sailing boats, and just taking on from what Carl was saying there as well. But in terms of the evidence, I know it's very difficult because we have sort of circumstantial evidence at times and no hard concrete evidence in terms of sort of prehistoric sort of skin boats and so on. And in relation to sailing, but we do have the rock art, the Bantry stone, for example. But I'm going to dovetail this in with my own passion, being the dugout boats. That we have evidence, solid evidence in Ireland of 5 dugout boats that were sailed. And one of them is actually dated to the Iron Age. It's a 10.5 metre long one from our 4th largest lake, Lough Fermanagh. And it is dated to around about 120 BC. But the conservator who organised the dating on it, Malcolm Fry, believes that it's dated to around about 120 BC, but the conservator who organised the dating on Malcolm Fry believes that
what sort of
evidence do you have, or have you had any evidence for sailing sort of fixtures in terms of mast depths, and particularly in relation to sort of the prehistoric sort of ones?
Well, we've no prehistoric ones, but they're obviously brighter, clearly as a sailboat, and the larger boats always build in a mast step, even if they're not going to use it, they still put it in. But they were sailed widely certainly in Arran, more so, they were always sailing. In, ethnographic, I'm talking, we have folklorists have been correcting for 200 years, and, they were sailing. And I think sailing technology, it'd be like an outboard engine. It was widespread in the Mediterranean, and, guys would have heard about this. And, naturally you're going to make life easier, you're going to put a sail up. It would be lovely to see the transition of sailing. Or was it did man come up with the same solution for the same problem in various parts of the world? We always assume it started in the Med, but yeah, it's a whole other world, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add, the sail is one of the fastest adapted technologies in human history. Everywhere that European explorers went, indigenous people, if they didn't use the sail already, they did within a generation, usually if they saw a European sailing ship. I think it would be very strange if people that were in contact with the Mediterranean world, where they use sails for sure, did not adapt the sail. Now, that's a quite controversial statement in Scandinavia, where we have no evidence for sails before, the late Iron Age. But, again, evidence or absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. We don't have any intact boats other than the Utspring boat, right, which is a very specific type of boat. It was a war canoe. So without any boats, how would we be able to prove it one way or another? Now, there is rock art that potentially could be interpreted as showing sails. You can argue that one way or another. I think they show sails, but other people disagree. So until we find a smoking gun, like a mast fish or something like that, then it's hard to say. But it would be very odd, I would say, if they did not use sails. You can also look at the faunal material, and when people start producing lots of sheep, right? And that's actually in the Bronze Age. Just saying.
Certainly the Haslo boat in Denmark is attributed to having been speculated that it was sailed, as has the Poole boat in the south of England. But to my mind, these are worn holes in the bottom of the boat. They're not solid evidence compared to sort of the actual structure of a mast step. But I see we have Jenna with us, so thank you very much for your patience, and it's great to see you, and sort of in physical form as well. So I'd invite anyone here, like, if they have any questions at all for Jenna, just please feel free to fire away.
Thank you so much. I actually have a couple of questions for Darina. Can you guys hear me?
Hi, hello.
Yeah.
How are you?
Hi, I put them on chat. Hi,
Okay.
so nice to see you. I wish I was there. I really tried. It just didn't really work for me. So I know that's kind of an ongoing discussion about walking on the skins, and I just wanted to, because you talked about the more recent walk on skin boats, in Ireland, so can you maybe tell more about what's happening with actually leather skins? Like, is that a skill which is actively preserved, taught, and if so, who's teaching it? How do you guys go about it? And I do have kind of like a follow-up idea that if that's happening in Ireland, maybe it's time for us to connect our Arctic skin makers with Irish ones.
Yeah. Hi. There's nobody actively making leather boats as working boats, but there's about a dozen I know of as kind of, replica leisure. The main way of stitching it is saddle making technology, because you do this double stitch and it also creates a seal. So, and it's the most efficient way to use the leather. There's been some absolutely crazy reenactments. People build baskets and cover them with 10 hides that are doubled up with awful stitching. I don't know why people don't do the research. Yeah. So, because skin generally would be a very scarce resource, and you would use every bit of it. You wouldn't double up seams and all. I know it's very different because I saw when I was out in Alaska with the big stitching, the wonderful stitching they do with the walrus hide is just amazing. Mm-hmm. No, it's saddle, and they're all replicas. So the working boats are all using canvas and tar, or now they're covering them in fiberglass. But they're still using the same frame and exactly the same shape. So it's the shape that seems to be the thing that's stuck in the groove, which is great. But it's not the place to go for leather technology. But we will talk.
I've seen.
We will catch up. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen the same in our Arctic, when the boat frame, which would be like 100 years old, sometimes has continuous presence in the family, is covered now with with the fiberglass. It's fantastic. It's really interesting. Yeah. And I also have kind of like general statement or sentiment. I'm so sorry to miss this meeting in person. When are we doing it again?
Yeah. So I have a question for you. I was hoping I'd see you here. When you were doing your PhD, when you were going through the archival boxes of the settlement from, I think, Point Hope that was stored in Fairbanks University, you came across a box with parts of a boat, some fragments of which were about 2,000 years old, maybe? You could, because this is marvelous. This is actually tangible evidence of boats in prehistory.
No, 2,000 years old. I think my oldest was like 10th century, 1,000 years old, maybe. And the site you're talking about is kind of farther east. It's on the north slope. It's the northernmost point of United States. It's called Bernyork Picnic, depending on pronunciation. And there are quite a few boat finds from that site. There was one set of these boat frames which clearly represented the same boat. And I'm guilty in not really publishing this research in full scope. However, University of Alaska Fairbanks is now revisiting this whole collection, and we are assembling a new task force which would be heavily based in indigenous communities. So we'll have a lot of traditional artists, skin makers, skin boat makers, and people of all kinds of traditional skills who will be working with us. So hopefully more is coming.
So thank you. We must catch up. Okay.
Please.
So
yeah.
we have,
time for you to come back to Alaska.
We have time, I think, for maybe one more short question and short answer also, if there is someone or anyone who wishes to pose one. And if not, we'll move on. Okay. In a moment or two, we're going to have Beth Arnold will give the closing comments of the conference. But just before this, we just have one little special thing that we're inserting into the program, and this is with Nusha, Miriam's partner, that she has some small gifts that she'd like to present to some of the organisers, and also we'll retain those that actually haven't been able to make it, to the actual sort of conference, like Cynthia and Ronald and Philippe. So the gifts are based on lace from Slovenia, and this is in recognition of Miran's logo that he developed, the lace doily, and that represented the intricacy of humankind with communication and trade with early watercraft, and it's significant that it wasn't a linear development, that it was just multifaceted, and each of the tendrils of the lace represents each aspect of watercraft, communication, human activity, the types of boats and so on, and how it gave sort of a cultural sort of transference over geographical sort of distances. And it was not the wheel, it was the boat. So Nusha, if you should come up, and I'm also going to ask for Beat, Cyril and Pedro to come along down, and also Anna, if you can come down and accept the gift for Philippe. I appreciate that. Thank you. for the benefit of the audience, they're saying very nice words to each other.
Thank you.
So this is, Anna is collecting a gift on behalf of Philippe Castro. Philippe injured his back and he's one of the local organisers but was unable to make it. And we have Cyril Drosky, who also opened the conference as well with the commemoration of Mirren.
A motif from an Slovenian secular trombone. Important. Thank you. And I have something for you, Niall, also.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm at home.
Oh yes, and Cynthia, we have one here for you. We'll show you on the camera. So this is a lace. I don't know if you can see it here. I'm holding up to the camera. It's a necklace, and so we'll make sure that this comes to you. Okay. Right. Okay. So thank you so much, and we'll move on to Beat now, and he's going to give the closing comments of the conference.
Well, the task shall not be very easy. Perhaps a first comment. I found this meeting very special and of exceptional interest, because once we are speaking most about small traditional boats who mostly don't find place on big colloque where the study of big wrecks, big boat ship are presented. And for this, I think we are very lucky to have so much information that usually we don't have in communication. For example, the major theme was logboat. I am sorry for the people from the north where they need to have a skim boat because they don't have enough food. But it was very interesting on the start to have 3 teams who are speaking about the same logboats from the same river in Portugal. And I think it's important that the country who invited us for this meeting can present also his discoveries, and it gives us the diversity which is possible with different type of researchers who are looking the same material. And, well, it was nice. Well, it's only 12 examples, if I am not wrong. And on the opposite, we have the impossible situation of Ireland with more than 200 or 800 logboats to manage. And I think here we shall have, all people who are making archaeology, the major problem how to manage a so big lot of data, of artifacts, who are very fragile and disappeared sometimes in some hours only. Well, the Congress was also for me the occasion to make the possibility to know what happened in some countries who are quite unknown, Czechoslovakia, Russia, Bulgaria, where we can see an increase of C14 datation, who give us solid data, but also the insertion of these discoveries in the landscape. And it gives a very new dimension to this material, and not only typology. Another side, sorry for my English, mostly I write it in French and I give somebody to translate it. Was the use, for example, on the other side of the Atlantic, to compare the historical data with transfer of technology, influence east-west, who can give for people who are working in Europe good ideas to progress in her research. And South America was for me a wonderful example of research, especially on the bassin of Rio de la Plata, where once we don't have not only C14 datation, but a very heavy and difficult work was done by the identification of the tree used. And if you have an idea of how many species of trees are still existing in South America, the task was not easy. And for this work, we can progress in the good direction if the people publish the botanical name, so the binominal name in Latin, that every people who speak other languages have chance to see what type of wood it is. And I have had very, very many problems with this topic to find the right name of the material that the people use. If you can go in the country, it's good, you have leaves, seeds, and so on. But when you are in museums, mostly the curator is not very happy that you take some samples on his material. Okay. Also, we have had some presentation close to ethnographic research on Guyana, Sao Tome and Principe, for example, to see how it is urgent, absolutely, to make this type of work, because all these traditional techniques and canoe disappeared in a very, very short time. And I think we need absolutely to have more people who are making this type of work and to present it on communication like that one. To finish, we just have a nice look to understand that it don't exist only, not only dugout in the world of the boat, but also in the north, the skin boats, who are another world, and on which I like once to hear more about the techniques of preparing the skin, that it works watertight. So I like to thank all speakers who take the patience of presenting us her very interesting research around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. We are also, in terms of the organisers, I'll be talking to Cynthia there in Switzerland as well, but we're also talking about being able to collate the conference as well, so that we can retain it for prosperity and future dissemination. So our plan is to make it available. We haven't exactly decided in what format yet. It might be PDF or it might be sort of held online in some form or other. But bear with us, and more news to follow on this down the road. But just be a little bit patient, and we'll get there. So the final last item on the agenda, apart from tomorrow's visits, and I think it's 9 o'clock here to meet here tomorrow morning. Great. For the trips, and Pedro already explained this earlier on.
We can talk about it at the end of the conference.
Okay, great. Yep. Yeah, so we're going to now have something to drink and to eat, and so follow Pedro. He's our Pied Piper, so he'll lead us to that. But one final thing is, because this is a very special occasion, and it's very apparent that it's for a number of reasons, I'm going to ask everyone to come down here so we can get a group photograph of everyone that attended this event, and of course with the fantastic backdrop that was organised by our local hosts. And well, I don't know, I have a camera, so on the phone I think other people have. So, yeah. Okay, so come on down, please. And